Hello, this is Andrew Ward. This is my video submission for Web Development 2, my final project. Um, this site combines a lot of what we learned both in Web Development 2 and Web Development 1. Um, Overall, I had an enjoyable time making this site. It isn't the best looking thing in the world, as you probably remember from my first final project, nor is it the most complex thing in the world, but it did take me a pretty good amount of time to put everything together. So we'll just get right into it. Essentially, what I did, I kind of started with the database and worked my way backwards. And in my Database 2 class, I used, for the final project, we created a database for an imaginary hospital. And so you can see in MySQL Workbench all of the tables for this database here. Of course, you saw my ER diagram for the database as well. And in that class, in Database 2, we created a very simple Java terminal application where you could run the requested queries. I believe we were requested to make around 21 queries, and I I made a very simple text-based menu in Java that you could kind of navigate around with and run these queries. And so I thought that it would be interesting to kind of compare and contrast what it looks like to make a web-based front end on this rather than a Java terminal-based UI, which, in the real world, it would much more likely to be a web-based front end, right? So if we look here, this is our landing page. This uh, some of the information populated it isn't from the show General Hospital, so you can see our fictional General Hospital here. This icon, which is also a link back to index.php, this is a header, and then this banner down here is a footer, and this links our CSS page and some various elements there. So on our main landing page, we have kind of a staff section and a patient portal records section. Now, in the real world, this would be behind some type of authentication, right? You would go to like the public patient portal, log in with your username and password, and then there you could view your patient records. I didn't want to get too involved with that and try to set up authentication. That was a bit beyond the scope of what I wanted to get into. But we'll start there. So if we go to the patient portal, you're presented with a simple menu here, and you ask for a first and a last name. And so I'll put in someone that I know exists. So if we search for a patient, you can see that after hitting search, the patient is returned from the database, and we have some various patient information here: admission date, diagnosis, etc. And the way this is accomplished is it's similar to the project where we searched about the baby name. Basically, what it does is it uses a query, a prepared statement to the SQL database, and the query returns JSON. And so, similar to the baby name project, where we then end up parsing the JSON and then populating this HTML table with that data. And if I type in my own name here, I am not in this database. It also will say there's no records found for the given patient. So again, not it looks simple on the outside, but it did take a bit of head scratching, I will say, to get that going, to get the query correct, get the JSON parsing correct, and all of that. So that is the way that works there. So if we go back to the main page, we have a staff area, and from here we have employee management and patient management. And so if we go into, and again, as I said earlier, this would be behind like some type of staff login, like your employee administrators or HR personnel would be the ones adding and removing the employees. Doctors and nurses, etc., maybe doing patient management. Again, didn't want to get too far out in the weeds. I wanted to actually get something working rather than over promising. So if we go into employee management, we have three options here. We can list all of our staff, we can add an employee, and we can remove an employee. So if we list the staff, this works similarly to our patient portal page that we saw earlier. Basically, it looks at the employee table, um, queries it, basically does a select all or a select star, returns that in JSON, and then populates this HTML table with our current list of employees. So if we go to add an employee, we then get a pop-up window where it asks us for some information about the employee, and you can see it is the same as what our current or what the table expects in the database. So if we say just going in next available ID here 12, and I'll put in myself here, and I'll make myself a staff category, you can see that I am added at the bottom of this because tied to this add employee button is basically a fetch, just like we did here, fetch employee, so it's updated in real time. All right, so that's the way that works. Now, very similarly, whenever we remove an employee, before I get into that, I guess we'll show this real quick. Essentially, what that did was, we'll open up that window to look at it again. Basically, using JavaScript, all of the information, the values of these informations from this field set are collected, and this is tied to a post, which AJAX request, a post rather than a GET, and the prepared SQL statement basically takes all of this information and adds to an SQL insert with all of this and then adds it into the database. I don't think that we covered pop-up windows in the class, so we can look at that just real quick. If we look at employees.javascript, you can see here in that add staff, in this function, and I had to look online to see how to do this. I had to consult Stack Overflow, Mozilla Docs, etc. We can see that inside of this function, we have created a window.open and then a pop-up which has some embedded HTML in this. And we have button handling set up, all of this in here. And then this calls this add staff to DB function down here, which is an AJAX request, like I said, of type post rather than get. And then on success, fetch staff, which is going to refresh the table to show that an employee had been added. So very similarly to that, if I go to remove an employee, it simply asks you for an ID, and I'm going to remove myself that I just added, so we'll say 12 here. Same thing, very similar to what we did earlier. Adding an employee is just a different SQL statement, basically looking for an ID and then removing that. Okay. If we go back, patient is, excuse me, that's the wrong menu. Patient management, kind of similar. We can list all of the current patients. We can add a patient. And then our next ID would be 7. And then we'll say Jane Doe here. Emergency phone 555-1212, and then an insurance policy, we'll say Blue Cross Blue Shield 1111. Then we can check in the patient. And then there is our new patient Jane Doe there. And then we can also remove the patient. Patient ID 7, discharge. There we go. So in general, that's an overview there. I did have, I guess, challenges would be not really having worked with the pop-up windows before, and getting the JavaScript handling right, getting the contextualization right in terms of my functions, getting those correct, variables falling out of scope because you're opening a new window, et cetera, et cetera. I guess improvements for the future would be there's not a ton of input validation on those uh, add and remove windows. It should probably tell you if you try to remove an ID that doesn't exist, or if you try to enter in like a non-standard email or phone number format, et cetera, et cetera. So that would be something for the future. But overall, I enjoyed making the project, and I enjoyed these two classes overall. I appreciate everyone being responsive in terms of whenever questions were asked. And thanks for having me, and we'll talk to you later.